All right. Hey guys, it's a beautiful day for music. It's a wonderful day for sound. Marcus here. This is going to be the first of a long series covering how to write for marching percussion, front ensemble, and battery. I figured the best way to do this is to just take you through a bunch of different examples that I've written for various clients over the years, explain to you my process of how I write, and kind of give you a little bit of a background of why I've made certain choices and things. As you can notice, I have some of the music here on the screen. First things first, this particular example, the wind part was arranged by Mike Bearden. He actually has a website called Mike Bearden, I think Drill and Music. I'll actually put it up on the screen here and things. He writes wonderful arrangements, and I've been working with him for years and years. He's a really awesome guy. This particular arrangement, why I chose to do it first, is because it's fairly straightforward. So one of the things you're going to look at, especially if you're looking to getting into percussion writing, is you're not going to start off writing very complex arrangements for people. You're not going to be writing for the Blue Devils or the Cavaliers or somebody like that as far as drum corps is concerned. You're going to kind of build your way up, starting with various high schools, maybe non-competitive, getting into some ones that are a little bit more competitive, and then maybe into some ones that have a little bit more depth to their composition, a little bit more sort of slow smoked kind of flavor to how they think about arriving to their moments and things like that. So you're going to start off with something kind of very simple. This is a beautiful arrangement by a Stevie Wonder tune. Let's dive right on in here. So first of all, there's 3 people in this front ensemble. There's no electronics. There's maybe like 2 snares, 2 or 3. I think there were maybe 2 tenors and then some bass drums here. I believe there were 4 of them. Yes. And things. So when I dug this kind of out of my archive, I recognize that this isn't the final version of this, but it's totally fine for educational purposes. So right from the beginning here, I have 2 measures of sort of drum intro, right? Now, maybe in a later episode, I'll talk about how to fill a gap of just gaping hole of nothingness and things, because that sometimes can be a little bit of a daunting task. But for now, just know that some of the main accents that I'm dealing with here is this one and bum 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 pack, that sort of rim shot on beat 4 here. And right from the beginning, I'm looking to show, because I know that they can do it. I specifically asked the percussion instructors or the band directors about the skill sets of their actual percussionists. So I know that they can play doubles on top of a triplet figure, which we just call a triplet roll. That's definitely something that percussion judges will kind of have in the back of their head to see if a group has that skill set or not. So right from the beginning here, they're doing that particular skill set on beats 2 and 3 of that first measure and things. Notice, by the way, that the bass drums are not doing the same exact rhythm. They're playing a more simplified version of that rhythm because at least for the most part, it's not within that particular group's skill set to be doing that. And I want them to open up the show with something that's achievable. Now, I'll get into sort of my first kind of topic of discussion here, and it's what I'm doing with the front ensemble. So immediately we see here, there's the main instruments. So this person is playing the vibraphone, and I have sort of 2 marimba players. Already you can see that this vibraphone player is his first stuff is kind of on the glockenspiel or the bells, right? But then the marimbas are immediately starting off playing some suspended cymbal, kind of crash cymbal things. This is super important for me because within a front ensemble, you have your melodic notes that maybe some other instruments can cover, but nobody on that field can make cymbal sounds, right? Nobody can make that very high frequency kind of spectrum washed out sort of sound. So I'll take it very seriously. In order to have that frequency there, somebody is going to be playing that either on the field or off the field, whether you have an auxiliary player or not. I'm very specific with having somebody playing those particular sounds. So that's why I'll choose here for them to not be on melodic material, but for them to kind of punch some of those accents that are happening within the battery parts here. Notice, by the way, that I'm splitting up those accents on the cymbals between both of them here. I'm assuming that marimba 1 is the person who is probably a little bit better, maybe a senior, maybe a little bit more of a senior player. So I gave them the and of 2. So that's why I started with the first person playing is marimba 2 on the downbeat, and then the second person has this. So crash, crash, there. Both of those crashes are going to be ringing out and things. Now, if you notice in this next measure where I have this 1 and 3, 4 kind of rhythm here, the cymbals once again are played within the 2 marimba voices. So choke, 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 and then rest on beat 4, and then they're actually crashing on beat 1. Those rests didn't appear here for some reason and things. So that's what's happening here with these 2 people, these 2 performers in the beginning. This crash will be open. These will be nice and short. So long, long, short, 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 long. And that's both of them actually crashing together. Now, let's talk a little bit about this melodic line that happens in this bell part that's happening with the vibraphone player. I'm going to go up to documents. This is Finale, by the way. Your program that you're writing in really doesn't matter, right? If somebody's listening to your band or your group play on the field, it's nobody cares about which notation program you use to write in. The only reason I really use this one is because I started using it super, super early on. It's what I know. I'm very proficient in it. All of them really work well. As long as you can get your ideas of music and tonality to the players and they can get that to people's ears, that's what really matters. And thanks. So what I did here is I went up to documents and I just changed all of this stuff so it can be concert pitch. So notice our normal transposing instruments are now in concert pitch. This allows for me to communicate this as far as the chord structure a little bit easier to you and things. So what's happening here is they're coming in, and I'm going to kind of analyze this from the bottom, which is kind of what I normally do. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with chord structures or analyzing things, it's absolutely necessary. If you can only play snare drum, if you're only like a tenor drummer or something like that, then you're going to be a little bit underwater or a little bit kind of struggling when it comes to writing a full arrangement for percussion if you don't understand the melodic side or a little bit of the music theory side of some of the things. So what I would suggest is go check out some of the basic kind of music theory YouTube pages out there. There's plenty of them. Even the simple ones that can teach you how to play a little bit of some piano stuff will go a long way in you kind of analyzing some of the chords that's happening here within the wind instruments and then seeing how that relates to your front ensemble or your pit percussion. So this is overall in the key of B flat. We notice here from the actual key signature, but I also get confirmation by this first chord that we have here. So from the bottom, I have this B flat. I have an F going on here. I have another B flat. I have D in the mellophone voice. I have an F, and then I have a B flat. At this point, I mean, I pretty much know what's going on here. It's just a basic B flat major chord. So that's what's happening here in this first part. And then it goes, I'm going to analyze this one in measure 4 here. So I have an F at the bottom. Okay, cool. There were Fs in measure 3 also. I have a C and then I have a, ooh, that's an A. So I know there's some form of an F, A, C chord. Sometimes I will kind of keep going just to see if there are any extensions, right? If it happens to not just be a regular F chord, or if they happen to add something like a 7 or a major 7 or something like that. So it looks like in this particular case, they're not. I don't see any E's here. So it's just a straight up F chord, and it's beautifully voiced once again by Mike Bearden. Check him out. So I have a B flat chord here, and then I go to some form of an F chord. Just know that. And then in this next measure here, once again, I can do the same kind of analysis and just kind of go along. Normally, I'll do that phrase by phrase. I don't necessarily just do one measure at a time. I kind of want to know what chord I'm starting on, where are the arrival points, and I'll do it kind of one chunk at a time so I can kind of see. A lot of times I will be able just to play the basic chord structure on the piano and work out how it feels. And sometimes I'll maybe sing like some improv kind of scales on top of it just to see what sort of options I have to add on material as far as ornamentation, or to maybe come up with a little bit of a counter line to make it a little bit more interesting, or something like that. In this case, all I'm really doing is outlining the chord. So you notice in this bell part here, I have a B flat chord. Now, being that I have a B flat chord, you're going to notice that there's a B flat here. I'm not going to necessarily play these in order. So I have a B flat, D, F, B flat, and then that same thing repeats. And of course, it's a lot higher because it's bells. I have that kind of idea in the first measure. Now, the notes are going to change in that second measure because the actual chord structure changes. The way that I come up with my ornamentation as far as what I want to play can really, it can be a few different things. Part of it is just based off of my knowledge of what works in the hands. Part of it is based off of my knowledge of maybe actually playing for mallets and me knowing what are the patterns that are most normal, right, when I see them. And a lot of it also just deals, once again, with me just kind of singing scale patterns and things like that, different arpeggiated patterns on top of the chords, because I like to think about patterns like this if you don't happen to play mallets or something, the same way that a guitarist would go from just straight up strumming into like finger picking. You're playing the same chords, but you're just breaking those notes up into different things. Or maybe the same way that somebody playing like the harpsichord, being that, you know, the notes die out a little bit quicker, you embellish the notes and you have a little bit more of a rhythmic version of the chord as opposed to a sustained version of a chord or a tonality. So that's what's happening here. Now, I gave that to this particular person for a few different reasons. Reason number one, both of the marimba players are already on the cymbals, and I prefer to keep them, especially when the actual winds come in, so they can have that nice upper spectrum, that upper frequency kind of going on. Thing number two is that I gave it in the bell voice because the bells they have the potential to travel and cut through the wind ensemble without doing anything too crazy as far as physically is concerned. It's way harder to get a vibraphone to cut through the ensemble without doing something crazy as far as your mallets or something like that, especially if it's one player. So that's the kind of consideration that I'm looking at there. Coming out of that, right? I'll finish this little phrase here for the front ensemble part first. You notice that one of the marimbas here switches to xylophone. And this is kind of another important consideration for me, is because I have this 16th note run that's happening, going to not necessarily the end of the phrase, but kind of like a false hit. You're going to hear it here in a second. This allows for these 16th notes to cut through the ensemble. Everybody else here has a fairly open rhythm set. And once again, this is just ornamentation. Now, the type of ornamentation this is here is just stepwise. All I'm really doing is playing a version of a scale just kind of going up. I'm starting here on this G, and I'm pretty much playing that one down and then up, one down and then up sort of pattern going all the way. That sort of idea, and it just keeps going for those 16th notes. Now, how did I know to write that? Once again, that's a very common scale pattern, right? If you play mallets, even if you play any of your dexterity exercises within woodwind or within brass instruments and things, you would have seen this particular kind of pattern before. It's not exactly a turn per se because it's not centered around one note. It goes sequentially, but just being familiar with a bunch of different types of scale patterns. And when sometimes people use those as a device to add ornamentation or to add a little bit of a flourish to certain parts, it just adds energy that can push you into the next section, which is really cool. So that's all that's really happening here. And passages like this lay out on the hands very easily within mallet instruments. So the xylophone allows for it to sort of cut through the ensemble, and then me having the marimba part here with it allows it to have a little bit of meat. It allows it to have a little bit of substance, right? So it's not just very thin and ticky-tacky sort of sounding. So that's important for me to double those up in order to give it a little bit of backing within the marimba voice. Technically, I could have made the marimba an octave lower, but I don't want it to get a little bit too mushy. And once again, the marimba is not mic'd. So if I do lower it an octave, it does have the chance to kind of blend it a little bit too much with the ensemble and not be in, I guess, a range that has the potential to push out a little bit more naturally without amplification. Let's check out some of these battery parts here. So once again, at the beginning, I have the showing of our first kind of skill set, that kind of thing with a triplet roll. When I come in here, I'm playing just straight up paradiddles. Now, thing number one is that is a skill set, right? Which is super important for us to kind of show those, especially within a competitive kind of arena. What's important to me is that I put percussionists in positions that they can develop a good sort of toolbox of things. And if I can put that within their show, it gives them a good opportunity to work on that for a good 2 or 3 month period of their marching season. So instead of writing those 16th notes just as alternating notes that are all right hand lead, that's a perfect place for me to make those paradiddles, right? And things, because it sounds exactly the same. If you don't play drums, you would never really know. But if you do, it just adds a little bit of variation in there, right? Now, those accents, or what motivated me to have those accents there, are these accents that happen here within the rest of the wind ensemble. Rest, 2, 3, 4. That's going on. And that really took precedent over pretty much everything else, right? So the first thing I thought about was making sure that I caught all of those, I guess, major kind of hit points. Rest, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, that kind of business. So even within the the marimba voice where we have those cymbals happening, I have this crash that ends the first kind of phrase here, even though all of these guys have rest, except for the long note people, the low brass people. But notice what's happening in their measure 4. When the rest of the winds have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, they have that short, 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 long here. And once again, they're splitting those up so they can perform those nice and easily there. Now, within that measure that we have the 1, 2, 4, 1, that business, notice that the basses are really kicking that on beat 2 and then 4, 1, 2, 4, 1 here. Anytime you see that notation change a little bit, or it's on that middle line, on the B line, if you're in treble clef, that just means that that's a unison. So all of the basses are playing at the same time right here and things. Once again, this is a kind of a little bit of a place that I can add some ornamentation within this particular skill set of playing a triplet roll. I can do that because here I have just a half note. So they're just holding that out. Ta, 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 ta. So with that, what I can do is add just a little bit more density of notes. So with that density of notes, it just adds a little bit of intrigue. And here, within my tenor voice or my multi-toms, my quads, whatever you want to call those, they're punching that beat 2 and beat 4 by playing with both hands. So both, when on the downbeat of actual measure 5. Let's take a listen to that intro in general, just with within the finale file, and I'll let you listen to it in sort of a separate program with a few other different kinds of sounds happening there. Let's check it out. Cool. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is that leads up to this kind of moment where the mellophones and some other members of like the woodwind family up here are all playing this da 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 kind of thing, this little chromatic business here at the end. So for me, my consideration is, okay, what would I want to hear if I didn't play drums here, right? And this is kind of one of the places that maybe some people go a little bit wrong, is we hear that open space, we see an opportunity, but is it necessary for us to take the opportunity to put things there? For me here, no. I did put some stuff there, but I didn't put like a really cool drum lick because I knew it would be heard, right? I didn't want to step over the purity of the moment with primarily what I would want to hear if I was balancing it is that nice mellophone lead and then a hearty wood section kind of propping them up, kind of surrounding that sound here. So there's only really two sounds going on within the percussion voice while all of this is happening. And one of them is a triangle roll that the vibraphone player is doing. And then the other one is a suspended cymbal that one of the marimbas is doing, going into measure 9 here. So that's really all that's happening. After that, they get to kind of their first arrival, but they don't give it to you as kind of a block, just big note. They immediately show some control and they show a little bit of maturity by playing that note nice and big, backing off of it, and then pushing all the way through to the end of the phrase here. For me, I need to make sure that I'm writing that in the actual percussion score, right? Especially being that I do not get to teach these people. And this is definitely a lesson that I had to learn sometimes the hard way. Not everybody will have teachers that will force them to play dynamics well. Like not everybody has like a percussion staff and things. So when I write some of these parts, I will write it with the intention of it getting softer just by design or by nature. For example, one of the first places here is in measure 6. You'll notice that the bass drums, this is kind of an overall crescendo for everybody. I'll let you look at it here. This is a forte piano kind of thing. So they hit it and they kind of drop off kind of on the end of one. And they kind of really push towards the end on beats 3 and 4. So notice what happens here. These guys are just straight up playing, right? I know since they're unmiked that they might have the chance potentially of being heard maybe towards the latter half of beat 1, but primarily on beats 2 and 3. By the time beat 4 comes here, especially because of that brass sound and how they push, you're not going to really hear beat 4 with this particular kind of combination that much. Your ears will lead you there though, right? Being that you kind of hear that sequential scale device going up and things. Now notice within the snare drum voice here, I do not give you a choice, right? You play on the drum and then you drop down to the rim for these two, and then you go back to the drum on beat 4. And that's what's kind of pushing up that texture right at the end. The only drum voice that's happening on beats 2 and 3 is within the tenor drums, and that's on drum 1 right here, which is a sort of a small drum and things. So you don't, even if this person couldn't control their dynamics, these guys are sort of dropping out. There's no bass drum here until the very end. And you notice I even waited until the and of 4 to get these guys in here, so that even if they didn't have dynamic control, this will sound like it's getting louder and pushing that energy into measure 7, no matter what, even if the people are terrible. Not saying that they're going to play it clean. I'm just saying that it's going to get louder just by design towards the end. So the same thing is happening here. Sure, this decrescendo is written, but even if these guys didn't play that, the drums are getting smaller here within the tenor voice. And the drum, it goes from playing 2 unisons, which means that everybody's playing here. And then one person is playing here, and that's just drum 2. And then drum 1 is playing here. So the drum is getting smaller, which means that there's just less mass. There's less air to actually be moving here. And I'll make that a little bit bigger so we can check that out as far as what I'm talking about. So, and then notice you don't even have a choice here on the downbeat of 1 because it's absolutely silent. And that's by design. The very place that these guys are at the most piano point, right? They're at their deepest valley. Guess what? We're not playing at all, right? And we come back in on the and of 1. So just by design, the drums are getting smaller and smaller, and then nothing. And then we add back in, once again, from small drums. Within the tenor voice, I'm starting on the little Spock drum, right? And things. And then same thing for the basses. I'm starting here on a nice small drum, and then the drums get bigger. And then as we crescendo, we sort of push to the end on everybody. These drums do get bigger here. I like the tonality of the way that this sound here. That's why the drums are going up as opposed to down. But that drum 1 can really crank out some sound, especially when you push when you push those mallets with a lot of velocity in there. Once again, suspended cymbal to end out that particular note there. Marimba 1 has the 16th notes that go along with some of the woodwinds here, just to give it a little bit of backing and articulation, especially at the end. It'll be very difficult for these guys to really push through and be heard within or forte or fortissimo moment with all of the brass players. So to have that little bit of extra articulation and a person that's up front on the sidelines to play that with them will really help them out. And notice that they're still playing that on the xylophone. So they went from the xylo to the cymbal back to the xylophone here. So that's not on marimba. It'll really help them get to that point. Notice now, this is the first time that we actually have the entrance of the concert bass drum. This is super important for me because this is kind of our version of like the explosion, the bass drop, the climax of the actual moment. And the way that I use it, at least in this particular context, being that this is the lowest pitch thing on the field, and this has the potential to add that extra oomph to a moment, that extra little dab of hot sauce to a moment. I really waited. I could have played that bass drum when the winds first came in here at measure 3. I could have played that bass drum maybe at the end of their forte piano, like when they had this part here, maybe even at measure 9. But I really waited, and I tried to have a little bit of constraint and really to drop that bass right at the end of that whole first phrase. Didn't want to give it to you too early there. So that's the first appearance of the bass, and it's nice and open. So when they get there, and it just explodes in this cacophony of lower frequencies. I love that sound, especially if it's tuned correctly. Now, for this next 2 measures here, this is when I'm giving the bass drums a little bit of some love here. Notice that these particular kinds of 16th note triplets is something that they could have played here in the beginning, right? It's the same kind of rhythm over that kind of triplet roll type of thing. The reason I didn't give it to them here is it's more important for them, especially being that this is probably something that they would have to work on for the season just because of where they are, this particular group, for them to have it in a nice exposed moment so they can work on it. And then when they get it, they feel great about it because nobody else is playing here. It's a nice exposed moment, and they're literally setting up this next phrase and things. Now, being that this is the unfinished version, I'm pretty sure I would have written a nice decrescendo here. So ba ba bum and it just tapers down and it passes the plate off to the next person who happens to be a little bit shorter, right? As far as the dynamics are concerned and things. So yeah, so that skill set of playing 3s, 3 notes per drum within a 6-tuplet kind of idea is definitely a skill set for basses, especially for them to play with the correct spacing and things. So that's what's happening here. I'll let you listen to that sort of first phrase within this particular program. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a backing, this is Logic Pro X. A lot of times I'll take some of the sounds and things and move it over to here. So when I do my sound effects and sound design things, or even if I'm not doing that stuff at all, I will do some of the suspended cymbals and like the triangle sounds and that kind of stuff within this particular type of program. It just gives me a few more options, even when I'm not doing fancy sound design types of things. This is just the drums only, and I'll let you listen to that first part here. Cool. And that gets us into this next phrase here, right? One of the things I'm looking at after that intro sort of thing, I know that I'm going to be getting into some repeated material, right? And this can be a little bit difficult, especially when I first started writing. I always struggled with trying to find ways to make repeated material sound interesting or to keep intrigue or maybe a little bit of cleverness, or always trying to introduce maybe a little bit of a new voice or something like that from phrase to phrase or whatever. So One of the ways that I did it here is this is the first time that the front ensemble will be playing for mallets. So if I happen to be a percussion person or a judge, I've made comments about some of the snare drum skill sets, that triplet roll. I've made some comments just now for those two measures about a little bit of an increase in demand for the bass drums there. Hopefully, I would have already made some comments about the dynamic control of bringing those things down by design in the composition. And then here, oh, I have a new technique. We're playing with 4 mallets now, right? And the overall dynamic level of the whole ensemble is brought down. And I'm really going to be listening for the ensemble balance of how the parts kind of fit and connect together with one another. So hopefully the writing here will give us the opportunity to show a little bit of cleverness in the writing, a new technique, and then some restraint in some of the other elements that are just kind of groove based. So 4 mallets here. Once again, just analyzing the chords, putting it in a very easy to handle for this group kind of format. Notice it's just all straight up block type chords. There's no permutations, right? The notes aren't kind of moving or playing with individual mallets here and things. The snare line is just playing on the rim with their right hands and then a rim knock, right? Click, 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 buzz, right? They're doing that. The basses, this da, 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 da. And then they pick up a little bit of the melody. Ba, da, 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 da. That business. As you can see, the mellophones have it here. Maybe somebody else. The altos, par for the course. Yeah. And also notice that the marimbas pick that same thing up here also. It's just a nice front to back moment of having lower dynamics lining up front to back, top to bottom of the composition, making sure that those are nice and in balance with one another and things. It seems like something that's very simple, but when it's done well, a lot of people really appreciate it. Notice that the tenors are sitting out for that first phrase here. And that's important for me because I'm waiting to introduce a slightly different color on the second phrase here. So when they come in, it's a little bit of a welcomed addition to what's happening. I'll start right on the bass drum entrance or interlude here, the transitional material, and then I'll play through the kind of the phrase. Cool. And I'll go ahead and play that within this other program here. I'm pretty sure I probably would have brought the tenors up maybe. Let's see. Cool, cool, cool. And you can hear some of the other little textures that are already starting to come in within the front ensemble voice. So you notice what's happening here. When I said I want to do something that's a little bit clever, notice that this is easy here, right? I just have 2 maracas, kind of like shakers, in one hand for this first part. And then right when I get kind of to this second phrase here, this person is playing 4 mallets in either hand, really doesn't matter. But they still have that maraca part and they're just dropping that pedal and playing nice legato, even whole notes. Ah, both, 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 And that just once again creates a little bit of intrigue. If you happen to be like, oh man, this person's kind of multitasking over there, it just lets them present themselves as kind of a multi-percussionist when you kind of just look over and check them out and things. So I think that's pretty cool. And then right when we get to this next part here, as far as the next phrase, they just kind of pass it along to some different instruments here. I guess the low brass. Yep. And then they cut out some of the woodwind voices in this next in the next phrase. So here I'm doing kind of the same thing within the mallet voices. I'm finding out what chord we have, and I'm sort of arpeggiating that chord, or I'm adding a little bit of an embellishment to that chord here. Now, being that they're already playing 4 mallets, I use this time to actually show off a permutation, which just means that they're playing a certain pattern with kind of 1 mallet at a time. So here they're just doing like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they're going back down. Yes, boom, 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 beep, ba, boom, 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 ba, 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 boom, 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 ba, ba, boom, right? And that just creates a little bit of variation and also a little bit of ear candy because you're splitting up those chords and providing a little bit of rhythmic contrast. Now, within the snare drum voice here, you'll notice that my accents are going exactly along here with a little bit of some interplay within some of the 16th notes and things. My accents are going exactly along here with the accents within the low brass. Once again, you can choose to write something a little bit more rhythmically interesting or a little bit more dense or maybe rhythmic counterpoint based. But I find for a groove section like this, I want to have little embellishments, but never actually lose sight of the changes or the hits or the melody, right? So I tried here not to get too far outside of that. So 1, 2, right? Just hearing that snare drum part, you can still hear the melody and it won't be a rub. You can kind of sing both of them in your head at the same time here. Basses have the same thing. Tenors have the same thing. Don't be afraid to have 1 or 2 things change at a time and keep some of the other parts just the same. It's totally fine. As long as there's something that people can just have that little pop of flavor here, they don't mind that they're still eating the salad. Maybe that one bite had maybe some bacon in it, and then your next bite has some sun-dried tomatoes or something, a little bit of savory, a little bit of sweet, a little bit of salty, a little bit of sugary. You don't have to change the whole dish every single phrase, just a little pop of flavor, a little bit of cleverness just to keep the intrigue of the ear and the intrigue of the eyes, because it's also an aesthetic sort of activity also. Now, that same thing kind of happens along here within the snare drums, continuing with the phrase. Maybe in another video, I'll get a little bit more in depth about how I exactly figure out what I'm going to do with some of these notes here and things. A little bit of a rhythmic figure in 36 that mirrors exactly what the woodwinds are doing here. Now, I don't always mirror what the woodwinds are doing, especially when we have this kind of stuff. It really depends on the size of the group. If the woodwinds have the ability to carry phrases themselves, if they have the ability to cut through the ensemble at certain points by themselves, then I would totally leave the front ensemble out of it and just have a pure, beautiful wooden kind of moment. But for this particular case, they really benefited from having that extra little articulation, especially the articulation of the rhythm within the front ensemble, that sort of helped them keep this nice and clear from up top and things. Within this next phrase, you'll notice that my snare drums kind of go back to this kind of backbeat idea, my bass drums start to play a little bit more. Notice that they were kind of resting on beat 4. Ba, 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 right? Over here, we start to pick up the density of notes a little bit. Boom, 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 ba, 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 ba. Yeah? And then my actual tenors here, or my quads, start to play something that mirrors the actual melody. And I'm not veering off too far away from that, right? I have very similar rhythms, right? And the actual pitches of the notes kind of go along with the melody, the relative pitches that I have there and things. Now, this is super important here that I prioritize what's happening as far as the changes in and out. So notice the second marimba person is playing a cymbal with a stick, and then they are reinforcing what used to be the rim knocks. So notice that these were rim knocks in the snare drum part for the previous phrase. And then this person here, the marimba, is kind of taking over a little bit of that sound texture in the next phrase here, right? So they're going to like just a regular drum set stick or something, playing their suspended cymbal as if it was a ride cymbal. So they're playing that with a stick and just right? Now, the only thing that's different is that sort of halftime groove becomes now a straight up kind of backbeat. So whereas before it was 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, now it's boom, 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 boom. Once again, just moving things forward. We're building to something here, and that is happening within the composition. So even if the people aren't building their intensity, or maybe if they're not shaping things right, it's already in the composition and it sets them up for success here. So we get to the next time we actually play this concert bass drum, and we have these kind of hits, this ba, 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 yeah? And notice that within my actual battery parts here, I left out the tenors on some of our embellishments, right? There had to be a little bit of a compromise on beat 4, and I'll explain this compromise here in a second, right? But really punching the 1 and 3 and that business, little bit of embellishment here as far as the sextuplet on beat 2. Now, let's check out what we have within these parts here. Da, da, and then these guys just straight up have a whole note that crescendos, and here in the tenor sax part, high brass is hanging out, mellophones, these guys are playing the ups, sousaphone still has the downs, right? One of the reasons that I chose to play that second embellishment not as a 16th note anymore, once again, it's just because of skill sets, right? So the first one here being that they don't need to play this that loud, I can really take the chance of them playing it nice and low here. Yeah, and that's a paradiddle diddle that they're doing there. Nice and smooth. Yeah. Now, what's happening in this next one is I really want to make sure that they're setting themselves up for this next downbeat absolutely solidly. And I'm pretty sure I would have ended up making these accented notes as far as this whole beat 4. So instead of them doing 3 and 4 rienda, that's nice and soft, I'm pretty sure it would have been pretty big, right? 3 and 4 rienda 1. Dum da 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 da. Dum da 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 da. To really push that energy into the next part and then back down immediately in order to continue the actual phrase here, right? Now, I made that compromise in order for them to play it loud. I know the accents aren't on here right now, but in order to play something like this sextuplet, loud, especially if I was trying to do it maybe as a paradiddle diddle or a singles. I'm not sure if that skill set would have been developed yet. So being that I didn't know, I kind of played it safe here and made sure that these guys really set up the band by just kind of kicking it off like a drum set. Boom, boom. Yeah. So that's why I chose to change that, right? The first time, this didn't have to be that loud, but being that everybody's kind of crescendoing into the downbeat here and then backing off on beat two, that's why I made that particular choice there. Once again, giving it a little bit to the tenors here after that, as far as having them play something very close to the melody of what's happening within the winds and things. And then as we get towards the end of this phrase, when we see these hemiola type triplets come in, noticing that I'm being very simple, being very clear, a nice linear moment that lines up top to bottom here. I'm not trying to fill in any of those spaces. I just want it to be nice and solid top to bottom as far as ensemble clarity and things, right? At least for right now. So that's measure 45. We'll go ahead and stop here for this particular lesson. If you have any questions, definitely ask them down below, and I'll try to get to them. As I said before, it's really important for me just to take you guys through a bunch of different things and showing you a real time of how I made some of these decisions and some of the things that I think about when I'm writing. I think there's not a whole lot as far as education of people who actually do this. I write a bunch of shows every single year as far as percussion books with front ensemble, sound design, voiceover, and that type of stuff. So just giving people access to this, and I hope is valuable for you guys. And hopefully you can jump in there and start to make yourself some money and things. Speaking of money, if you like what's going on here in this particular page, go check out my Patreon. I really appreciate you guys doing that. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Deuce.